Welcome back to TYT Sports, everybody. So at this point, you've probably seen a few of the videos we've posted from Mike Wellman, who is our UFC contributor and correspondent. He also has his own YouTube channel, which we're going to encourage you to check out via the description box below, because if you want more consistent UFC coverage and news, you can go over there and give him a subscription. He's more than deserving of one. But we wanted to do a little intro and then kind of shoot the shit over the UFC for a little bit. So this is Mike Wellman. Please get to know him. He's the man. You can follow him on the Twitter. You'll see his lower third after it goes up in post-production. I can't just magically make it appear. Mike, the most boring of all questions. How are you?
Good. Thanks for having me on.
Of course, man. Okay, two, where are you shooting out of? Where are you shooting from? I think we've been over this, but I'm just curious so the audience kind of has an idea.
Yeah, I'm from Springfield, Massachusetts.
Nice. How far? Actually, Jakor, our director, I think, is from around the area. How far from Boston are you in general?
About 90 minutes or so from Boston.
So you grew up a diehard Boston sports fan? Question mark? No.
Can't say I did, no.
Wow. And what teams do we go with?
We go with pretty much MMA exclusively.
Oh, all right.
So that's not a lot of room for other sports. There's a lot of MMA leagues to follow.
That's true, and your focus is 100% devoted to it. If you check out the Twitter account, besides just results, but good opinions and obviously commentary, observation when it comes to those things. But there's a few stories that we were kind of going back and forth on, mostly obviously that you sent over. The one I wanted to start with, because we never, and I say it as part of the media, and I say that it's equally my fault as it is anybody else's. Mighty Mouse doesn't get the coverage that he rightfully deserves for a man who has defended his title 10 times and is now in the books with Anderson Silva and possibly pound for pound the greatest fighter, or there's an argument for it. He did say he wanted to fight Conor McGregor. I'm a yes man. I love the idea of people wanting to take these fights. Do you think he really believes he wants to fight Conor McGregor?
I think he probably does want to fight McGregor. He's also talked about fighting Cody Garbrandt, moving up to bantamweight. So I think at this point with Mighty Mouse, he probably just wants money fights. That's kind of the era that we're in right now. So he obviously wants to defend his title for the record number of times, 11. But aside from that, I mean, after 10 title defenses, you're still getting the lowest ratings on UFC on Fox cards. You probably want to start calling out the bigger names.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, he's run through and it's not even like some of those cards came down to decisions, but even the ones that did, at least from my perspective, it was never that close. At least the last three for sure. And which is one of the things you also mentioned too, is that so if Mighty Mouse would have to move up in weight, there's a few other fighters you mentioned that you think should be moving up in weight. Who, where, and why?
Yeah, so I think weight cutting is a problem. We're seeing fights fall off cards, weigh-in day. We just had the Cormier problem in New York where he weighed in at 206.2, came back a few minutes later, had the towel for the assist there, allegedly. But yeah, there's a lot of guys who should just move up in weight, you know?
Yeah, but you mentioned like Jose Aldo being one, and why Jose Aldo, I was going to say, just because his resurgence as a defensive fighter, at least in his last fight, seems to be of interesting note.
Yeah, Aldo has talked in the past about going up to lightweight. He was one of the people that was maybe going to be picked for that Khabib-Tony Ferguson interim title fight that, again, didn't happen because of weight cutting issues with Khabib. But yeah, I think that Aldo, like McGregor, would probably have a lot of success at lightweight.
Hey man, this is why I like having you on in the first place, because you know the sport a lot better than I do, and you know it a lot better than Francis does as well. I guess I wanted to go into one more thing, at least when it came to the way that UFC fighters like to go after Dana White, and whether or not it's something that you think they do because it brings them more attention, if it's a balance between the attention and they feel like they can use a social media platform or at least go to the press to get their word out, or if they're just doing it because they believe they're being treated unfairly. It had to do with fight of the night bonuses, which fighters have said in the past is a way that the UFC controls them, and it's sometimes very subjective as to who gets them, while other fighters on lower cards, for example, or at least in preliminary fights, are scrapping to make it in the UFC alone, let alone have the money to continue training camps and how injuries can sidetrack all of those things. The state of the UFC right now, especially after the the one that Georges St. Pierre was trying to create, the Fighters Association, or the Fighters Union, if you will. The state of the UFC right now, how are they going to kind of monitor that tightrope going into the rest of 2017 and 2018 in terms of their superstars and then everybody beneath that threshold?
Yeah, I think that what we're talking about is Ally Quinta the other day went on a profanity-laced tirade against Dana White. Also said F you to the UFC on Twitter. He's had a history with the UFC. He's allegedly banned from getting post-fight bonuses, which are $50,000.
Yes.
Like, he was one of the ones that mentioned that it's a way the UFC controls fighters into kind of sucking up, according to Iaquinta. I don't think fighters really bash Dana White because they want to. They all know the consequences.
Yeah.
I mean, we were just talking about the MMA unions forming. All those guys forming those unions, when they talk to fighters, the first thing they hear is, I don't want retaliation and retribution from the UFC. So as far as calling out Dana White, not necessarily in your best interest money-wise if you intend on staying in the UFC. But I mean, you can see from the first quarter of UFC events that a lot of guys just aren't really happy with the money they're making. Tim Kennedy, another guy, just re-enlisted to help Trump kill terrorists.
Yep.
He said when he first joined the UFC that he could make more money as a garbage man. So Dana White didn't like that, obviously. He was one of the ones, along with the MAAA effort with GSP and others.
Thank you,
There are several unions that have kind of popped up recently, or attempts at unions in MMA. So, I mean, if you're the UFC, I would consider maybe rethinking the hardline stance about not paying the fighters so much. I mean, it's easy for me to say. I didn't just pay $4 billion for a sports franchise. But, I mean, you got guys like Iaquinta here, who's pretty much a top 5 lightweight, and he's got to go on the broadcast and tell everybody that he's selling houses.
It's not a good look. And here's what the crazy part is, like, I will always be 50-50 on Dana White. I think that he plays an instrumental role. I've gotten to talk to Dana White once or twice in the past and be around him. And I also understand that from the business perspective, there is a level of charisma in which he speaks. And when you hear him, he's a person who sounds way better in person than he ever does in quotes. I've always stood by that, because the way that he kind of expresses things in context, you sometimes want to be like, well, maybe he's not such a bad guy. But he's wishy-washy on a lot of topics. He uses the likes of ESPN and Fox Sports to break news that people know for the most part, but will drop the hammer on the media if they try to do it before he does, which is a slight ego thing. I've been back and forth with him. I'm going to leave you on this one. I'm curious, where do you stand, at least on Dana White's ability to create more success for the UFC this year, especially with some of those bigger names not appearing for a while, but obviously of recent, Jones Cormier 2 seems like that's happening, and an amazing card in Dallas, I believe. I'm sorry, in Dallas? Yes.
UFC 211, yeah.
Yeah, in Dallas, which is top to bottom. Fans around the globe are going to be excited to see.
Yeah, I think that right now you can kind of see it, right? The UFC can't exactly stack all these cards. They can't exactly get the fights that they want to make. For instance, no Diaz brothers on any cards coming up. No Conor McGregor on any cards coming up. But, I mean, they can stack cards. You'll get a UFC 211 where they'll put 2 title fights. These cards will be great for hardcore MMA fans, but I mean, you got a guy like you just said, Iaquinta. Who knows? He could have been the next Conor McGregor with his mic skills, but he's selling houses now. So it's going to be a lot tougher for the UFC to get stars like Ronda Rousey, Conor McGregor, when you really aren't catering to the needs of the top athletes, you know?
I feel really bad for whoever's in competition with Iaquinta in the housing market, though. Like, he's got the upper hand if they get into any kind of fight. That would be the best.
Raging Out Realty.
I was gonna say it would be. It would be easily. I don't know, what are those HGTV shows where they have like the competitions between realtors? My God, that would be the best ever. Have him on the show. Get the man some money, and then have him back in the UFC. Mike, thanks for joining me, man. Make sure to follow everything on Mike when it comes to the Twitter. It's at Mike Wellman 88.
Yep.
At Mike Wellman 88. The MMA Word on YouTube. Check that out. Check out the professional Twitter for the MMA Word as well. It's going to be all in the description box below. And mostly you're going to see Michael sending in clips here and there on topics of the UFC. We know the comment section has been extremely kind so far. So congrats. You're surviving, because my God, the comment section does not love me when I talk about the UFC. But that's okay. I still love them. Only love. I'm the opposite of Cody Garbrandt. I am only love. Full love. All love. Thanks for watching, guys. Comment below, and we'll see you next time.